Hello, my name is Brett Lloyd, and I'll be going over my Qlik application that I created for my Information Systems Senior Project. I created an NFL player statistics database to look more in depth on fantasy football points, both by team and by player and by position, and I'll get into what all the application can do right now. So this first page is the overview page. As you can see in the top left corner, it is titled the overview page. We've got a bar graph in the top left that shows fantasy points by team. We then have a distribution of fantasy points graph in the middle, and then a fantasy points by season graph at the top right that shows a timeline of fantasy football points. So one of the cool things we can do, and the story that I kind of want to tell through this, is the downfall of the Pittsburgh Steelers as far as fantasy points and just offensive production goes, because that is my favorite team, and I wanted to look more in depth on the Steelers. So one thing we can do is filter by team. Scroll down and find our Pittsburgh Steelers and select them, and that will then change all of these graphs just on Pittsburgh Steelers data. So we can see right here, the reason I did this is because I wanted to see this timeline where we're pretty high in fantasy points throughout these 5 years, 2014 through 2018, and then a huge drop to 2019, and we never really hit that peak again over these next few years in my sample data from 2014 to 2024. So now that we know 2014 to 2018 was kind of our prime, we can use that for the rest of our analysis. So we can clear these filters. Fantasy points by team, you can see, are color-coded by team. So you can see the Steelers are right here, kind of in the middle of the pack. I have their logos loaded in if you hover over them. But yeah, we're right in the middle of the pack, as you can see here. So if we want to filter by season through those seasons that I just demonstrated, 2014 through 2018, if we select those, you can see the Steelers now go to top 3 in total fantasy points among the entire league. We can then see the distribution as well. It shows bottom team being the Jaguars in 2014, top team being the Denver Broncos in 2014. And again, these are color coordinated, so it's pretty easy to see where the teams lie. We can then filter the seasons that I didn't select, which would be our worst season, so 2019 through 2024. And then you can see the Steelers are nowhere to be found. We scroll all the way to the bottom, and they are here basically within the bottom 6 teams in the NFL, and that's because Vegas and Oakland combined. So this is kind of one bar here, but the Steelers are in the bottom 6 teams throughout this timeline, and as far as fantasy points goes. And then you can see like this yellow in here, Steelers towards the bottom, yellow still towards the bottom, and all of these graphs. So something happened, and that's what I kind of want to figure out what happened. So that's what the overview page does for us. We can go to the next page, which is our positions page, as you can see up here. And I'm correlating this downfall to our loss of our killer bees, is what they were called, which was Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown. So they all left / got worse around that same 2019 timeline area. And I think Antonio Brown was definitely our best player and our biggest fantasy point producer as well. So we'll look at him. We have a wide receiver page, a quarterbacks page. They all have different kind of graphs that are tailored towards their position statistics. But we'll look at Antonio Brown right now because he is the key factor in the downfall of the Steelers. So if we want, we can select these seasons that I said again that we were in our prime, 2014 through 2018. And one thing I love about this application is it really does tell a story and everything does make sense. So in these years was when we had Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown left the Steelers in 2019. So literally up until 2018, he was with us and he was the best receiver in the league, and these graphs show that. So we have a fantasy points correlation, fantasy points on the y-axis, and then receiving yards on the x, which you can then change to yards after catch or receiving targets as you please. And you can zoom in and drag to see more in-depth information. And we have Antonio Brown, obviously highest fantasy points scorer here, and then he was only beaten by Julio Jones in receiving yards, who was another Hall of Fame receiver. But we can see Antonio Brown, the size of the dot is actually receiving touchdowns, which is why it's so big. He has 59. And you can see this over here as well. Receiving touchdowns is this yellow bar. Antonio Brown's is way above everyone else's at 59, which was another reason he was a huge contributor to our team and to fantasy football as a whole. We can also see down here in the bottom right, his target share was the biggest in the league over these years at 11.9%. And then even if we go to this top 5 wide receiver by fantasy points graph, this shows the top 5 wide receivers each year. This has a separate filter we can go to. Number 1 in 2014, number 1 in 2015. He was number 1 every single year through these years. If we select all these years, he's the number 1, and by quite a bit too. He's number 1 fantasy football wide receiver. So we can now go do the same thing in running backs with Le'Veon Bell, which was the Steelers' elite running back at the time. And so we can filter when he was active, which his best years were 2014 through 2017. He sat out in 2018 and left the Steelers in 2019. So we can filter these years and see kind of the same statistics. Rushing attempt share, he's top 4 in the league, which is similar to what Antonio Brown was. And then we have this bar chart that shows rushing attempts, receiving targets, and fantasy points. So rushing attempts and receiving targets are pretty much any time he's going to touch the ball, as well as fantasy points correlating with it. And we see Le'Veon Bell has the biggest bar. He has the highest fantasy points. I mean, you can just tell that he was an elite running back at the time. And then in the top 5 running backs case, we can go through his years as well. So I already know this about him. 2014, he was number 1. 2015, he got injured, so we can select this 2015 season. He won't be there, injured. So all these stats tell the story. 2016, he'll be there. Number 3 in the league in fantasy points. 2017, he'll be there. Number 2 in the league in fantasy points. 2018, he sits out the whole season, so he will not be there. And like I said, he's gone. Once he leaves the Steelers, he's never as good as he was, so he, again, will not be there. So these stats really do tell the story, which is really what I'm trying to drive home. And then we can go to our last page, which this is the positions page, and then we can go into the players page. So this shows their player stats a lot more in depth. So now we are pretty much the farthest drilled down, if you will, through our pages, which is the players page. We started with overview, then we went to positions, and now we're at players. And so we can look at Ben Roethlisberger here, which is Steelers quarterback. So we can filter him, type in his name, select him, and we can see his pass attempts and fantasy points with this chart. And like you can see, this immediately sticks out. 2019, super low. 62 pass attempts, 12 fantasy points. You might think that's a problem with the data, but it's not. He actually injured his elbow this year and was out. In week 2, he injured his elbow and was out the rest of the season. So makes sense why his bar is so low. And then you can just look through all these graphs. They go super in depth. You can drill down by year, select those. We'll clear our filters up here and go to wide receiver page and just do a little bit on Antonio Brown again. Type in his name, select him, and we can see these were his years, like I was mentioning earlier, 2014 through 2018, when he was elite with us as the Steelers. Left in 2019, and you can see his bars just dropped from there. He bounced around between teams, but he never was the same as he was production-wise as he was with the Steelers. And so you can see the yards per reception and yards after catch over time. Just another like timeline chart. You can see his catch percentage with this being great. This is elite receivers are in this green area. So you can tell, again, he was an elite receiver. It's interesting to see if you want to go through his prime years, like I was mentioning, that this number, it actually stays around the same. We can take a few of these years out and it'll go up, as you can see. But he really was an elite receiver, and the graphs do show you that. And then what's also helpful is down here, this just kind of chart shows you his exact numbers for every stat. So we've got targets, receiving touchdowns, receiving yards, everything you might want to know. So then we'll go over to our last page, which is running backs, which is our Le'Veon Bell page. We can type his name in, select him, and just see his information. So like I said, 2015 gets injured. That's why his bar is low there. You can see there is no 2018 bar, and that's because he sat that season out. So all this data is accurate, and it truly, truly tells a story and helps you drill down. And so that is a brief look at what this dashboard can do. It can do so much more if you really want to get in depth in it. But Qlik really is a great app at allowing you to interact with the data and then the dashboards and really, really, really drill down to the specific details. And that is why I like this setup of having the overview first. That'll tell you the big picture. You want to find out a little bit more, you go to the positions page. And each one of these pages has different graphs that make sense for each position. So I'm not going to have pass attempt stats for wide receivers. Those are only going to be for quarterbacks. So that's the type of thing we deal with here. And then drill down even more to the players page, and you just see way more in-depth stats and exact numbers within this table and everything that you might want to see to truly tell the story.